Bom dia, tenho a elevada honra de apresentar, convidando a nossa oradora principal desta manhã, pessoa e face já conhecida, e nós em Moçambique gentilmente tratamos-la por Mamã Graça, e ela é que nos vai brindar com a sua apresentação. Por favor, Mamã Graça.
Eu vou começar por pedir desculpas aos moçambicanos, porque, estando em casa, eu devia fazer a minha apresentação em português. Mas eu vou fazê-la em inglês, para o benefício da maioria dos nossos participantes e, portanto, Sua Excelência o Ministro, Sua Excelência o Senhor Governador e todos os moçambicanos aqui, as minhas desculpas. Your Excellency Ernesto Ngove, Governor of the Central Bank of Mozambique, Your Excellency, I should start with my Minister of Economy and Finance, Adrian Malian, Your Excellency Mr. Alfred Hanning, Executive Director of the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I'm not good in protocol, I'm sorry. All protocol observed. I'd like to thank the Alliance for Financial Inclusion for the opportunity to address this distinguished audience today at its annual Global Policy Forum. It is my honor to talk to you this morning in my capacity as the founder of New Faces, New Voices, a Pan-African network of women in finance represented in 15 countries. We engage governments, especially ministers of finance, governors of central banks, CEOs of financial institutions, and businesswomen themselves to enhance synergies for the financial inclusion of women in the formal economy of the African continent. Let me ask an obvious question. Why is financial inclusion important? Having a bank account is the first most important step for any citizen to have an identity in the financial formal economy. Otherwise, you simply do not exist, you do not count in any way. For us women, particularly in this continent, we are known to be in the so-called informal sector. And in the informal sector, we are not part of the formal economy. We do not even influence the GDPs of our countries. And that's why creating New Faces, New Voices is a way of claiming our rightful place in the formal economy so that we can count and we can be at the center stage. As you all know, more than 2 billion people today in the world operate outside of the formal financial system. In Africa, the percentage of men without a bank account is 60%, with women being much higher at 70%. Numerous studies have shown that in terms of assets too, and uses of financial services, the needs of women are different from the needs of men. Hence, a one-size-fits-all approach to financial inclusion will not succeed in closing the gender gap. Moreover, even among women, there is a tendency to lump us all in one basket, whilst there needs to be better segmentation depending on income levels, whether you are in rural or urban areas, education levels, and economic activity. Excluding 60% of African men and 70% of African women, we believe it is lost business for financial institutions, and it is short-sighted approach for governments to neglect these numbers. In other words, we are saying it is in the self-interest of financial institutions to embrace and include all active men and women in the formal economy, and it is a self-interest for governments to make sure that they cover all their citizens in activity of the economies, not only because they will have taxes, but because they will use better the energy, the creativity, and the inventiveness of their citizens for successful economies. Let me talk about our initiative. When we started New Faces, New Voices in 2010, the issue of women's financial inclusion was hardly on the map, especially in Africa. Fueled by the belief that women are fundamental contributors to our economies, we first engaged financial institutions to show them that there was a solid business case for investing in women. Our ambition is to position women at the center of economic development as entrepreneurs, investors, consumers, and more importantly, to allow women to climb the ladder of leadership in the financial sector as CEOs, members of ExCos, and chairs of the boards. I'm pleased to see that after 5 years of constant advocacy work at national, continental, and global levels, there is a shift taking place in the world community that is finally starting to accord women their rightful place in shaping their own economic futures and the futures of their countries. Some analysts are saying that women are the next emerging market. And to quote a report by Ernst & Young, I quote, "The potential impact of women on the global economy as producers, entrepreneurs, employees, and consumers will be at least as significant as that of China and India together." The world finally gets it, that no country can successfully develop by leaving 50% and sometimes more than 50% of its population behind. Governments, especially in the developing countries, have been struggling to determine the exact size of populations excluded from access to financial services. This raises the importance of disaggregated data by gender, age, rural and urban, and as I said, also by economic activities, so that we can have reliable statistics on who and how many people are accessing formal and informal financial services, which products and services they are using, and what interventions are necessary to accelerate this process. Let me now give you some examples of our work as New Faces, New Voices. We began working with the Bank of Zambia in 2011 because we have a strong gender champion in a Deputy Governor, Dr. Kakasa Mabula, who I hope she is with us here today. It didn't take long to see that we shared a passion for empowering women, and because of her decision-making position in the Bank of Zambia, where she could drive regulatory and policy changes, a number of gender-sensitive policies were put in place in that country to accelerate women's financial inclusion, which have yielded positive results today. One of these was the creation of a task force on gender inclusiveness, which is made up of central bank officials, representatives of financial institutions, banking associations, legal bodies, and civil society groups, including New Faces, New Voices. It was on the basis of this partnership that we joined forces with the Bank of Zambia, GIZ, and financial sector, Deepening Zambia, in 2014 to conduct a qualitative study on women's access to financial services in Zambia. Dr. Mabula recently informed us of the release of the FinScope 2015 Zambia survey. The findings show that financial inclusion levels have increased significantly for adults, from 37.3% in 2009 to 59.3% in 2014. Most notably, the government has beaten their target of 50% inclusion, which was outlined in the Financial Sector Development Plan. The most notable achievement, however, was a 22% increase in the levels of women's financial inclusion from 33.9% in 2009 to 57.4% in 2015. In Rwanda, New Faces, New Voices had been working with the National Bank of Rwanda since 2014, when it made a pledge at our African Women's Economic Summit to double formal inclusion for women from 36% in 2014 to 72% by the time of our next summit in 2016. Rwanda is a country where 52% of the population is female, and where unusually 57% of the adult working population aged 20 to 44 is female. Funded by GIZ again, the Bank of Rwanda is currently working with New Faces, New Voices on a study to assess the policy, legal, and regulatory framework to identify gaps and to convert them into opportunities to fast-track financial inclusion for women. As a prime example of its determination to better the lives of women, the Rwanda chapter vision is a Rwanda where women co-create their full financial inclusion and reach their economic potential. A 2-day conference was organized in June by the 18 founding members of the chapter under the leadership of the Vice Governor of the Bank of Rwanda, who is with us here today. Under the theme, I quote, "Transformative Financial Solutions for Women," unquote, the event attracted over 300 participants from financial sector, development agencies, government departments at national and local level, women's organizations, business leaders, and so on. The chapter used this evidence to unveil its bold and ambitious plan to transform the lives of 1 million women in Rwanda by ensuring their participation in the formal financial sector. The chapter is targeting women in 6 clusters, which are: 1, low-income women at the bottom of the pyramid; 2, women in cooperatives; 3, women owners of micro-enterprises; 4, young emerging women entrepreneurs; 5, junior mid-level professionals; and 6, established businesswomen and senior professionally. This shows the importance of disaggregating even women, not as if they are a uniform body. Similarly, our Uganda chapter is actively working to reach unbanked women in rural areas. The position of women in rural areas without access to financial services has been growing worse between 2009 and 2013. Recognizing this situation, the New Faces, New Voices Uganda chapter conceived, designed, and implemented a financial inclusion and enterprise development program called FiniSafe, which stands for Financial Inclusion Through Savings and Village Enterprises. After 1 year of implementing the FiniSafe program, 250,000 people, 60% of them being women, from 465 villages in Lwengo district have accessed knowledge on banking services, products, and their rights as consumers. To date, 377 saving and credit cooperatives and village enterprises have been established and registered with the bank accounts at Finance Trust Bank, each comprising 30 to 40 members who save regularly and meet on a weekly basis to monitor their savings. Even more exciting, the ready market created through FiniSafe caused a new bank branch to be opened at Mbiri, an area which had never had a brick or mortar bank in the history of that district. Let me now come back home here in Mozambique. Mozambique is one of the countries with the lowest percentage of financial inclusion in SADC region. In December 2013, New Faces, New Voices partnered with the Bank of Mozambique under the leadership of the Central Bank Governor Gove. And we looked at how to accelerate women's access to financial services in the country by focusing on financial education and consumer protection in women's demand for financial services. how to increase women in management positions in financial institutions, and also look at the role of mobile banking in promoting women's access to financial services. What we found is that very few banks were targeting women, hence their product offering was limited. But slowly now, this picture is changing. BCI Bank has a women-focused credit line with preferred interest rates for women business owners. Women's Microbank in Matola also has a new initiative targeting women with specific savings and loan products. Fides Microbank offers a group loan product designed around women's informal savings groups in Nampula. And Sokremo is introducing more flexibility in its collateral requirement for women. This is a very encouraging, but we cannot afford to be complacent when only 50.5% of women are banked, and the gap in the inclusion rate between men and women is almost 10%. Despite our emphasis on women, we should equally take into consideration the imperative of including the youth as part of our financial inclusion plans. Young people constitute our current and future labor force, but they also constitute the bulk of the unemployed who pose a potential threat to our political and economic stability. If their talents, aspirations, and needs are not addressed or channeled to productive purposes, then we may have a big problem. In our case, statistics show that 53% of young people between ages of 16 and 30 are not saving at all. 46% don't have any form of insurance, and 47% are not accessing credit. This is a warning sign that too many are financially excluded. On top of this, many are poorly educated, especially young women. Providing opportunities for young people to also be part of the formal economy and the formal financial system is clearly critical to our short and long-term economic growth and sustainability. And this is a reality for any African country. The three positive examples I presented earlier illustrate what can be achieved when all stakeholders come together with the determination, focus, clear strategies, and targets. I am delighted that many African countries have made commitments, but I note with concern, however, that only a few countries out of all the Alliance for Financial Inclusion members have singled out women in their commitments. We are told that of the Bank of Papua New Guinea and Central Bank of Solomon Islands and the Reserve Bank of Vanuatu are the only three countries that have explicitly set targets to reach the unbanked female population of their jurisdiction. I need to challenge them, all AFI members, to take this as a homework. We need more countries, and especially African countries, to do the same. Alliance for Financial Inclusion has been successful in building a global network of regulators and policymakers from developing and emerging markets, working together to increase access to appropriate financial service for the poor. However, as previously mentioned, one of the biggest challenges countries face is the lack of coordination and collaboration between key stakeholders in the financial sector, which go beyond regulators or policymakers. Another challenge is implementing good policies and being held accountable when targets are not achieved. There's a great room for collaboration between governments, regulators, the private sector, and civil society in ensuring financial access for all. This creates an opportunity for organizations like ours, New Faces, New Voices, and Alliance for Financial Inclusion to find ways to collaborate and coordinate efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, in September 2015, world leaders will adopt in New York the Sustainable Development Goals, in which they pledge to leave no one behind. I'll repeat this. The pledge of Sustainable Development Goals is leave no one behind. It is in this framework that financial inclusion has to be translated into providing a financial identity to every youth, every woman in rural and urban settings, to have a financial identity in the formal sector, which allows them to take a stake in the formal economy in the next 15 years of the Sustainable Development Goals framework. In other words, in 15 years, we are challenged to close the gap of running in our countries two economies. The formal, which embraces a tiny percentage, and the informal, which is where the majority of our people are. So closing this gap in 15 years is the pledge the financial sector has not only to make, but to achieve. I am aware it will require a massive scaling up of our efforts. Business as usual is not an option. And it's not an option precisely because it's not a question, like for me, a question of human rights. It's a question of business common sense. And it is a question of equity for governments to make sure that they embrace all the citizens. I leave you today with this challenge. And I thank you and wish you great successes in your deliberation during the next few days, but offering our very modest contribution as New Faces, New Voices to work with you and to make a success our economies and to give an opportunity to every single adult citizen of our nations. I thank you.
Muito bem. Queria, em primeiro lugar, agradecer esta aula de sapiência que a Mamã Graça, fundadora de New Face, New Voice, apresentou a todos nós. De facto, encontramos nesta apresentação feita os principais objetivos da nossa organização, que é a inclusão financeira. E falamos indistintamente de inclusão financeira para todos, homens e mulheres, adultos e crianças, mas não há dúvida que há especificidades. E para atendermos às especificidades, precisamos de melhorarmos as nossas estatísticas, desagregando ainda mais, para que possam colher essa informação e para que ninguém fique atrás, como a Mamã Graça referiu-se. Nós, em Moçambique, foi transmitida a nossa experiência e não sei se vai valer mesmo a pena fazer uma outra apresentação sobre Moçambique. Eu sinto-me aliviado porque tencionava dar alguma informação, mas é esta mesma informação que foi apresentada. Portanto, ao invés de esgotar o tempo que me foi concedido para falar sobre este assunto, certamente que vou falar em tempo mais reduzido. De qualquer modo, porque foram colocados muitos desafios para os reguladores, para os fazedores de políticas, e nesta sala estamos precisamente reguladores e fazedores de política. Gostaria que quem quisesse fazer algum comentário sobre a apresentação ou quiser também fazer alguma pergunta à apresentadora, que se sentisse à vontade. Vou abrir o debate para a plateia. É só levantar a mão, identificar-se e apresentar o seu comentário ou a sua pergunta. Sim, sim.
I am Idin Dema, Deputy Governor, Royal Monetary Authority of Bhutan. I am very privileged to be here today to listen to this very good presentation made by Madam Gracia Marshall, founder of New Faces, New Voices. I fully agree with the kind of elaborate presentation she has made and the kind of improvement she has brought in the overall financial landscape for women in particular. I just like to second that having a policy which is gender-based, more so for the women, is very important. And I do believe that educating women or having women be financially included in the formal financial sector is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. That is what I would understand. And I would like to also say that if we look into, or if we work on policies which will empower women from the financial perspective, then it would empower the whole family. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado. Mais questões? Sim. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Charity Liwayo, Deputy Governor, Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. I just want also to add my voice in appreciating the speech by Mama Gracia, and to say that I'm very pleased that the Zimbabwe chapter for New Faces and New Voices was established in Zimbabwe last year. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend, but what I just want to say is that I do appreciate the clarity that she has given in terms of making sure that there is disaggregation of data to enable any policymakers to ensure that we know what is happening in terms of also women accessing finance. Usually our data is not disaggregated. We just talk about the poor or we talk about people in rural areas, but we usually don't go further in actually making sure that out of those who are not accessing, how many are women, how many are youth. So I just want to appreciate that clarification that we need to go further, and to also make a commitment that in Zimbabwe we have been given a challenge from this presentation, that as we go further in working on financial inclusion, we need also to make sure that we also go into that aspect of women's access to finance. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado. Sim, faz favor.
Yeah.
Sim.
Sama from the Central Bank of Pakistan. A comment for the AFI, for Alfred. You see, taking a lead from what we heard from the madam today, this morning, can we think of having a more focused sort of group or subgroup or some sort of thing for purely for the women empowerment and for women financial inclusion, because that shows how big segment is that and how much that can contribute to the overall objective of the AFI. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Alfred, faz favor.
I think it's working, right? Is it working? It's working. Okay, great. Well, thanks very much for the question. This, in fact, was exactly what I wanted to bring up, because we want to be concrete and practical as well. Now, just to inform you, Madame Grasser, we have had a discussion about gender and finance in Africa just recently, and I think your organization was represented. And as a result of this conference, which I think was very enlightening, we got a request from the same Bank of Zambia, actually driven by the Deputy Governor, suggesting to AFI to set up a working group on gender and finance. Now we have a couple of working groups on specific policy solutions, as you are aware, and we have been dealing with this question in the board 2 days ago, what we should do. Now our initial reaction to this is first of all very positive, but we are not fully sure whether a working group is the right thing to do, because it could also lead to some, isolation, for this topic in terms of, paying maybe a lip service to it, but it is in some corner. So we are thinking of other ways. How can we establish this maybe more like a cross-cutting issue? That could be another alternative. So my question to you, Madame Machel, would be, what would be your recommendation for AFI? How to address this issue? to make it really effective. I mean, we are open to reflect on this.
Muito obrigado. Não vejo. É difícil começar depois. Sim.
Okay. Thank you, Governor. Madam, thank you for your explanation, and we are very delighted to hear the progress of your program and its impact to women in Africa. I just want to share about our program in Indonesia when we do some program to increase the rate of inclusion, financial inclusion in women. The future or the next challenge is to maintain the women to be in that level. So it's not only about how to include the women into the financial community, but how to then empower them to make them stay in that level and even increase or upscale the class. So I think women, I believe it's a cross-cutting issue. So it's not only about the gender itself, but it's also about how to empower them as a entrepreneur. And then it will give a greater impact to the community. That's my comment. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Faz favor. Sim. Aí.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Musa Kamara from Central Bank of Liberia. Mine is a question, but firstly, let me also commend the speaker for the elaborate presentation. My question is, who should be the one to drive the question of women access to finance at the national level? Does it have to be the central bank, Ministry of Gender, like we have in some countries? Who should be the driver behind this? And how can policy regarding women empowerment, including access to finance, be properly coordinated such that the targets and goals of empowering women, including access to finance, can be successfully implemented? Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Vi uma mão aí. Sim, faz favor. Depois vai ser a vice-governadora de Ruanda.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Mwaura from Central Bank of Kenya. I sit in the digital financial services. We have worked very well in the area of mobile financial. I appreciate the presentation by Madam because she has sent us into another level of exclusivity, which we had not seen before. She has started us on the path to look at women. And those of us who have looked at law and women, there are very many legal instruments that bar women from accessing very many services. So the direction she has taken us would require that within our working groups, we refocus to look at that particular discrimination, which is also an element of exclusivity. And going further, as I was listening to her speech, she also touched on another very important note, the exclusivity of youth. So I think as we sit back as working groups, we should look at also the exclusions that we have with respect to youth. She gave us some very dramatic numbers, which also tell us about the youth discrimination, not discrimination per se, but youth exclusion in especially the subject of finance. And finally, Madam, although you didn't mention that, I think we should also begin to think about exclusion with regard to the physically challenged human persons who we have. When you think about the blind, you think about the various disabilities and access to finance, you may also want to ask AFI that we can look at that dimension. So in my conclusion, Madam, thank you very much. You have opened us to another aspects of exclusion, which we should take on board, like Alfred is saying, within our working groups. And when you participate in a future forum, we believe you'll be with us, we'll tell you how we have addressed it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sim, Monique.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. Thank you, Madam Grasa Machel, for an inspiring keynote address as usual, and also for mentioning the work we are doing in Rwanda, modest work. Maybe towards the question raised by Alfred, and also the comment from the previous speaker who mentioned about the work of the working groups. One possible starting point for AFI could be maybe also having the Maya Declaration, which is really our, I would say, flagship, or really where you see all the commitments for financial inclusion. The policy statement of this financial inclusion network also mention the issues of women financial inclusion, because it's nowhere to be seen in the Maya Declaration. And yesterday we were discussing the Maputo Accord, and we inserted a paragraph on SMEs. I would humbly suggest that we also consider having the Maputo Accord also talk about these issues of including women in finance. Thank you so much.
Muito obrigado. Então vou pedir a Mamã Graça para comentar os comentários e também responder às questões específicas levantadas.
I'm sorry, it looks like my mind opened up better when I'm standing than when I'm sitting, so I'm sorry to come back here. Let me begin by emphasizing a few issues which in my reading, because reading it's a little bit difficult for me. I'm a bit of an oral tradition person. I know that you have built a powerful platform around the Alliance for Financial Inclusion. I acknowledge this and I applaud this. And I think it's extremely important that you create this space where there is an open and deep debate about really looking at our economies and say, how do we build them to become much stronger? How do we bring, I want to insist, to bring every citizen who is adult to make a contribution in a meaningful way. I mentioned also that having a bank account, just to have a bank account, it means like what you do when you register a citizen. You are making him or her part of the nation when you have ID, okay? And the opening of a bank account, it is just the first, but extremely important step in which you say, this citizen counts in our economy. Otherwise, really there's no any way you can trace, the millions in every country of ours is how they contribute, where they are, and how they contribute to the formal economy. I want to insist on this, to the formal economy. The third thing I want to make, we really have to think deep and say, how can an economy of a country provide for all when only like 30% of men, yes, it's a 40% of men, and 30% of women can be counted, which means 6% of men don't exist, 70% of women don't exist. for goodness sake, this is not an issue of whether we like it or we don't like it. I have to say, it's an imperative for any policy maker to say, this economy is to serve, I don't know how many million of people in every country. In my country, it's 24 million. In other countries, maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40. But the economies are to serve everybody. They are not to serve minorities. And I think this is extremely important for us to put in our mind and say why financial inclusion is so important. Not only important, it's an imperative, but it's also central to other activities of economy. I know I'm preaching to the converted, but what is the problem for me is that I don't feel that when we talk of women and we talk of youth, we realize that in statistics of our population, these are the majorities which count. They're the biggest majority of our population. Either there will be 50 or 52% if they are women, and young people in some African countries, actually, they are up to 70% of population are young people. So, what I'm saying is that I acknowledge the efforts of our government, I acknowledge the efforts of everybody, but the result is that if you look at the people we have to serve, and at the people we are covering until now, we still have a long way to go. And we need to revisit, in my view, we need to revisit not the strategies necessarily, because maybe the strategies are very clear, they have been set up, but the pace in which we implement those strategies. That's just my introduction. Now, I want also to insist on these gender-based strategies. You know, we are women, but we have different ages. We are women in mining, they are not exactly women in tourism. Women in agriculture, they are not necessarily women in telecommunications. So, it's important to know that this group called women, or this group called youth, and even if you say in rural areas, it's not just a geographic kind of being in rural areas. It's because the economic activities which they are doing in rural areas is different from the urban in many cases. So I'm saying and I'm pleading with you, please give a huge importance to disaggregating data. It is not an option. For us to do the real work, disaggregating data is fundamental. So we need to build the strategies with our statistic agencies. I don't know how they are called. In my country, Institut Nacional de Statistica, and in many countries will be called different things. But we really need to take these statistics very seriously. A brother of mine from there introduced a very important element of people who are physically or mentally, people who live with disability. Let's be honest. Many of our countries, at least in Africa, we don't even know how many people live with a disability. And the disability has also different forms. So you need to know those who are physically, those who are mentally, those who are different kind of disability, and how do you include them? So this issue of statistics is a fundamental planning tool if you are to do your job and do it well, wherever you are. But here we're talking of financial inclusion. But wherever you are, statistics are And also, within the so-called Sustainable Development Goals, this is a huge issue which is being raised, and that's why they talk of the called data revolution. Now, let me quickly respond to the questions which were asked. Do we need a working group, or we just put it as a cross-cutting issue? Well, I will leave it to you. But I think a working group may be a transitional process to put the emphasis on the issues, which means you would have a group which takes thoroughly all the issues which need to be taken into account to introduce and to refine, the policies and the plans and the targets. Then it can disappear. But it probably, as a first step, that may be necessary, because not all of us at the same time, we have the same understanding of how do you, sharpen and refine the strategy of gender. So it wouldn't be, in my view, a permanent structure, but it could be an instrument which will help to think it through, then bring it to the General Assembly, it's not assembly, to the plenary, and to submit for approval. Once it has been adopted by everybody, then the next challenge is, what is the accountability mechanism you are going to put so that it has been adopted, but you can verify who is doing what, who is doing well, and to encourage one another to do better. That would be my suggestion. Indonesia asked about how do we empower women themselves. I didn't have the time to talk about this. We acknowledge that we as, for instance, New Faces, New Voices, and other women's groups, we have to work with women. As we demand from financial institutions to look inward and to improve the way they serve women, we need to energize women. And actually, in our program, we have what we call Women Enterprise Development Programs, which are to help to graduate, that's what we call it, graduation. As I was saying, millions of women are in a small, very small business. How did they grow from very small to become small, and from small they become medium, and the medium, then they become big? Because our ambition really, it's not just to have, to pull out to the formal economy. It's to have women sitting where you, can I use a language which is not very formal, where you, the big guys, you sit and you make decisions about the economy, about the future of our country. You sit there and you'll see that women are just a token. They're just a few. For them to be able to sit there, they have to command big business as well. If they're just in the small and medium, their voice is also small and medium. So it has to be big and strong. So graduation for us, we have a program of graduation, and we are starting really to work with women to prepare them. I won't go into detail, just to say that they have to move from one level to the other and grow there. We also have, I mentioned very quickly, working with banks that we need women to be moving from just being clerks in banks. They have to be in the ExCos, heads of department, ExCos. They have to be CEOs. How many CEOs of big banks do you know of in the world, not only in Africa? Very few, isn't it? And then even in boards, because they will bring a thinking and leadership style which will enrich the boards themselves. And it contributes to change the system. So we have all this, growing them, but also building them to be in the decision making, to respond to Indonesia. And then the question, which I think it was the last, is to say, who should be the driver? I thought I had been very clear here. I don't have to choose between my Minister of Finance and the Governor of Central Bank. You know why? The minister is a policymaker, and he's going to say, in 5 years of my president news, what he said here, I want you as a financial system to do ABCD things. It's his role. The central bank will look at the regulations and say, how do I translate the command from the policymaker? How do I transfer in regulations which will enable the financial institutions to operate? But he also has the power of calling all the heads of banks and say, the president has made this challenge. The regulations will change this way. And all of you, you're going to go back to your banks, you are going to put strategies internally that in 5 years, you are going to make, the president, what he said and what we have done will come together. He can't be promising and then the financial inclusion doesn't happen. So it's not a question of who drives or whether it's a ministry. That's why we said policymakers, regulators, the financial institutions themselves, and of course, women coming to this. It has to be a collective effort in which everyone exercises his or her responsibilities, and you know how you contributed then to the collective results. But I find it a bit difficult to say it's only to regulators to do that. I find it a bit difficult, but at the same time, I know women's gender, we call them women of gender, etc., etc. Many of them, they talk just, of social protection, etc., etc. They also have to come to the fore and to demand and to help to implement, this inclusion as we're talking about. So everyone has a role. That's, in essence, what I'm saying. The roles are different. They have to work together. And if you like, I don't know whether it's the Minister of Finance or it's the Governor of Central Bank. Someone has to call the meeting, but everyone has the specific responsibilities and everyone has to respond. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, muito obrigado. Esta é que é a Mamã Graça. Fala com muita veemência, convicção e de forma mobilizadora. Eu penso que estamos todos sensibilizados. Vamos, obviamente, dentro do possível que nos transmite. Queria, mais uma vez, e para terminar, pedir uma salva de palmas, mas muito forte, a Mamã Graça.
Muito obrigado, Excelência. E, seguidamente, teremos um breve intervalo de 15 minutos, que nos permitirá conversar, trocar impressões e, provavelmente, ir aprofundando ainda mais os debates enquanto nos refrescamos. 15 minutos, por favor. Obrigado.